After this, they came back to their knees and then stood up, still oblivious to anything going on around them. Just when it seemed that the prayers were probably over, the entire routine started all over again. Michael was deep in thought as he continued down the hall. This was the closest he had ever been to people of this level of spiritual devotion. Something about the Muslim prayer ritual was unsettling. How could you deal with people on an intellectual basis who were so steeped in medieval beliefs? On the other hand, if they could follow this mystical prophet Muhammad with all of his apparent contradictions, Michael felt sure he could persuade them to follow him. After the prayers finished, the UN facilitator who coordinated activities at the villa ushered the imam and his staff into the conference room. The formal introductions were made and the usual polite pleasantries were exchanged. Arachoff then steered the discourse straight to his purpose. "Your Honor," he began, nodding toward the imam, "and distinguished guests, I appreciate this opportunity to meet with you. As you know, our world finds itself standing at the crossroads of history. Globalization and the increasing interdependency of nations have mandated the emergence of a new order. This is happening whether we like it or not. What is within our power is the ability to determine whether this new world order will usher in a new era of hope with peace and security, or whether it will bring to the human race deepening conflicts and wars that very likely could result in the extinction of mankind itself." Warming to his subject, Michael continued, "We all realize that historically the most divisive force on earth has been religion. Most of history's wars have been the result of conflicting religious beliefs that finally pulled the adherents into armed struggle. The same religious conflicts exist today, but now there is a huge difference. Our world possesses weapons of mass destruction. If we continue to allow religious differences to foster division and conflict among the people of the earth, eventually a war will erupt that will spin out of control and will destroy us all. The question is not if it will happen, the only question is when." Imam al-Hassan rose to his feet at the end of the table. He paused for quite some time before speaking. "Mr. Arachoff, your words are filled with wisdom, and we welcome them." Michael breathed a silent sigh of relief. He didn't know how his ideas were being received by the practitioners of this Eastern religion called Islam. The Imam continued, "We all know that the tides of history ebb and flow. They sweep away before them all that resist their will, and they will lead mankind to its ultimate destiny. An example of this was when our own Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was given to the world by the will of Allah, the one true God. In inexplicable fashion, the religion of Islam grew from one man, Muhammad, to the greatest force on the face of the earth. Today, 1.2 billion people embrace the Islamic faith. More people now give adherence to the teachings of Muhammad than profess allegiance to any other religion on earth. Any new world order that does not recognize the central role that Islam must play is destined to failure. Seeing that Islam began from nothing in the early 7th century to become the world's greatest religion today, it is obvious that the message of Islam is destined to provide light to the world as we move from the era of the nation-state into the time of global government." Arachoff decided it was time to cut to the heart of the matter. "Imam al-Hassan," he reasoned, "there are literally thousands of religions in the world today. To think that all of them could be merged into one religion is simply a fantasy. However, I do think there is a way to bring about unity among the major religions while still respecting diversity." The Imam interrupted. "I don't see how such a thing could happen. Please explain." Michael continued, "A sister organization to the United Nations called the United Religions has been envisioned. You know how separated the nations of the world were before the creation of the UN in 1945. Now, after less than half a century of effort, the nations of the world have been forged into the world community, and except for a few rogue states, we speak with a common voice. We believe the same can be accomplished with the religions of the world." Imam al-Hassan replied carefully, "Islam is a religion of peace. It is also a religion of truth. The core truth that has brought light to 1/5 of the world's citizens is belief in only one God, Allah, and in the revelations given to Allah's prophet Muhammad. When the world acknowledges this wonderful revelation, the enlightenment of mankind will have, in fact, arrived. It began to dawn on Arachoff that this wasn't going to be easy, but he decided to try again. With his warmest smile, he looked the Imam straight in the face. "I think perhaps I need for you to explain some things to me. I hear you say that yours is a religion of peace, yet in the name of Islam, violence is being perpetrated around the globe. How do you explain this?" It was obvious that Imam Khalid al-Hassan had been asked this same question many, many times. The reply came without hesitation. "We do not approve of terrorism in any form. Those who commit terrorism in the name of Islam are in reality the enemies of Islam." Michael broke in. "So you do not condone the suicide bombings in Israel? I read that these martyrs for the cause of Allah are promised immediate paradise." "We must understand the definition of terrorism," the Imam replied. "When an enemy has taken your land and you are in a war of liberation, that is not considered terrorism." "Even if the bombings target innocent women and children?" Arachoff asked incredulously. "There are no innocent women and children in this case," Imam al-Hassan contended. "These women have sons who grow up to enforce the occupation. In a few years, these children will be flying the planes and driving the tanks used against the national aspirations of our brothers in Palestine." Arachoff's exasperation was starting to rise to the surface. He addressed the Islamic delegation more forcefully now. "The whole world knows the Muslims are not going to convert to Christianity. Likewise, the world's 1 billion Christians are not going to convert to the faith of Islam. Besides Christians and Muslims, there are the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, the Baha'is, and on and on. 1,000 years from now, there will still be different religions on the earth. This is simply a fact of life, whether we agree with it or not. Since this is true, we must deal with that reality. How do we prevent a world-engulfing Holocaust that could come as early as today? We, who are attempting to build a better and safer world, think there is an answer. We simply can no longer tolerate religious conflict. Most major religions believe in one God. Some call him Brahma, some Jehovah, some Jesus, and others Allah. Why can't we simply agree that we are all referring to the same God, even though we know him by different names? The time has come for all people to denounce religious conflict, to renounce the practice of proselytizing, and to teach their children to accept and respect diversity in religious thought and practice. The Imam cleared his throat. "If you are asking us to recognize the legitimacy of pagan forms of religion, that will be impossible," he said emphatically. "We would have to renounce the teachings of Prophet Muhammad to adopt such a belief. The cornerstone of all truth in the universe is that there is one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is his prophet. Belief and submission to this truth is the key to peace on earth." "But Imam al-Hassan," Arachoff protested, "you and I both know that such uniformity of belief is simply impossible. Humankind will plunge into the abyss of World War III before such a pipe dream ever comes to pass." Arachoff decided to try one more approach. "How do you believe, in this world possessing weapons of mass destruction, the human race can avoid the global holocaust that seems all but inevitable?" "The will of Allah will ultimately be done. We have no doubt about that," the Imam replied matter-of-factly. "Our Quran teaches us that the Almighty will soon come to save humankind and usher in a Muslim world government. If we do not achieve peace before, we will realize it when the Mahdi comes." "According to your prophets, what will the Mahdi do when he comes?" Arachoff asked with more than a little interest. "Muhammad told us what he will do," the Imam replied. "First of all, he will be a descendant of the Prophet. He will fill the earth with justice as it is now filled with injustice and tyranny. And he will rule the world for 7 years." It became obvious to the Imam that the encounter had reached an impasse. "Mr. Arachoff," he said, "it is almost time for our evening prayers. Thank you for meeting with me. Perhaps we can meet again at some future date. Be assured that Islam will continue to work for peace on earth." With that, the entire Muslim delegation filed down the hall toward the East Room to pray. Chapter 12. The build-up to the Save the Earth Summit was remarkable. Such headlines appeared as 25 years to save the Earth. Will holes in ozone cause cancer epidemic? Running out of fresh air? How much longer can the Earth support life? Global warming. All nations now interdependent. Repeatedly, the media ran special stories concerning air pollution, water shortages, and the danger the environment presented to the survival of the human race. Suddenly, environmental issues were front-page news. In all of this pre-summit hype, one message came through loud and clear. The environment is a global issue. No nation can face this life-threatening problem alone. We must now face these issues together or perish. All nations are now interdependent. We all breathe the same air, we all drink the same water, and we all have to live on the same earth. Representatives from almost every nation attended the summit, including over 100 heads of state. The Rainbow Coalition was there. Environmentalists and animal rights activists sat in the front row. It was the world's environmental wake-up call. An entire year of intense work had been put into preparation for the Save the Earth Summit. World-changing decisions almost never took place at a summit like this. The vital decisions were made during the preparatory meetings. Summits were simply to rally the foot soldiers and mobilize world opinion. Since the purpose of the summit was to set the agenda for the 21st century, it was decided that the document to be sent home with all summit participants would be called Agenda 21. It was hoped that this document would become the roadmap for the world as it entered the new century. When Michael Arachoff strode to the podium for his keynote address, the convention hall fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, world leaders and fellow world citizens, we stand today at a defining moment for each of us and for our world. As melodramatic as it may sound, the future of our world is literally at stake at this time. The future of your homeland and mine. The future of our children and grandchildren. The future of our common home, Mother Earth. If we do not act now, our planet will become uninhabitable. As I speak to you, carbon dioxide emissions are eating away at the ozone layer that protects us all. The Earth's vital resources are being consumed at an unacceptable rate. In the name of progress, industrial growth is advancing at an unsustainable pace. Ladies and gentlemen, this problem is not going to fix itself. The world community must now band together to save the common home we share. No nation can do it alone. We can no longer render mere lip service to caring for our environment. The time has come when we must make environmental reform our top priority. How can we remain passive when 80% of our world's resources are being consumed by 20% of the world's population? How can we rest when 50% of our Earth's inhabitants exist on less than $2 per day? Can we expect the poor nations of the world to be content while the industrialized nations continue to exploit them? How can we expect to enjoy peace on Earth when such inequity reigns? As Arachoff spoke, you could feel the rising indignation from representatives of the third world countries. Those from the Western world sat in uncomfortable silence. Michael continued, "I am not suggesting today that we all return to the Stone Age, but there is a better alternative. We can do better. The time has come for us to demand that development be sustainable. Sustainable development simply requires that every action of man must take into account its effect on the earth and its environment. This is not an option. It is a necessity. We cannot continue raping our earth and expect it to survive. Now is the time to make the hard decisions necessary for our future existence. To do anything less is the height of irresponsibility and borders on being criminal. Rada stole a sidelong glance at the President of the United States. His expression was impassive. The U.S., as the world's #1 polluter, had the most to lose from this conference and the emerging environmental movement. Rada swung her attention back to her husband. "So what must we do?" Arachov asked, his eyes moving from one world leader to the next. "We have prepared Agenda 21, a blueprint to halt and reverse environmental damage to our planet, and to promote environmentally sound and sustainable development in all countries on Earth. For the far-reaching programs of Agenda 21 to be successful, a concern for the environment must begin to be integrated into every human action and every personal decision. What we manufacture, what we buy, what we wear, how we travel, what we eat, whom we choose as leaders, these and a myriad of other daily questions must begin to be answered with a recognition that every single human action has an impact upon both the environment and all other people. Is the challenge at hand a big one? It is huge. Is it impossible? No. If we are willing to give environmental issues the priority they deserve, we can still save this planet and restore it to health and sustainability. We can do it. Let us not be faint-hearted. Let us bring the human race together as never before to face the crisis at hand. We are one people. We share one environment, and we live in one common home. We must care for it. We must preserve it. Let's do it together." When Arachov finished speaking, the audience spontaneously rose to its feet. The clapping continued for nearly 5 minutes. Some in the crowd were actually seen wiping tears from their eyes. Here was hope. Here was the kind of leadership they had been yearning for. Leadership not afraid to rally the people into making the hard sacrifices. Leadership not afraid to challenge the big powers and hold them accountable. Even the President of the United States stood. Chapter 13. The Save the Earth Summit was a tremendous success. The morning after the close of the summit, Michael and Rada Arachov and Morris and Barbara Samuels met with Bodo Mugavo, the Secretary General of the UN. He was all smiles. "Smashing success," Mugavo exclaimed as he entered the room. "All the major newspapers of the world are carrying stories about the summit today. Global awareness of environmental issues has never been this high. It is wonderful." The Secretary General continued, "I guess the next question is, where do we go from here?" Morris cleared his throat. "Actually, the answer to that question is more important than anything that happened at this summit. All of this hype will be gone in a few days. You don't change the course of the whole world with one summit, no matter how successful. The real key is relentless, grinding follow-through." Michael interjected, "The critical thing, as I see it, is to employ full-time staffers accountable for implementing the actions of the summit." Looking at the Secretary General, he inquired, "Do you have a department available that would be able to assume responsibility for following up on decisions that have been made?" Morris, being the UN expert that he was, chimed in. "The first thing that we should do is establish a high-level commission on sustainable development. This commission would report to the UN Economic and Social Council. This would ensure that the initiatives of the Save the Earth Summit are being carried out, and that UN agencies around the world are implementing the principles of sustainable development." "Can the Economic and Social Council handle the additional workload?" Michael asked, turning to the Secretary General. "Oh, I think so," Mugabo replied. If we have to, we'll increase their budget in order to meet the need. This simply must be given first priority. Let's set our priorities right now, Michael said excitedly. I jotted a few things down during the summit that I thought would be important, Rada volunteered. Michael was not at all surprised. This was where Rada shined. He was the salesman, but she was the organizer behind the scenes. So what do you have? Morris inquired. None of this will happen if it is left to chance. We must move to incorporate the decisions made at the summit into law, Rada declared. But how do you intend to do that? The Secretary General was curious. Rada explained. We must devise treaties for nations to sign that will obligate them to carry out the goals set by the Save the Earth Summit. Do you think you can get them to sign? Mugabe asked. Rada smiled. What do you think of the news coverage and the public pressure that brought over 100 heads of state to our summit? You know that many of them did not want to be here, but public pressure forced them to come. The same approach will work for this. Morris chimed in. Once the treaties are signed, we will chip away little by little until we convince the parliaments to ratify. That accomplished, we will have brought the provisions of these treaties to the level of international law. But we still have a problem, Mugabe interjected. Believe me, just because you have international law, it doesn't mean the nations will obey. They only obey what they choose to obey. That brings us to my next point, Rada interjected. We must have a world court. Those who violate international law will be held accountable to the world court. And you think you can accomplish that? The Secretary General asked incredulously. You wait and see, Michael admonished. You just wait and see. One more thing, Rada said, and this may be the most important. We must stay on message. The key phrase is sustainable development. This concept provides the rationale for every action we want to take, for every treaty that will need to be signed. The rulers of nations will accept more encroachment upon their national sovereignties under the guise of sustainable development than we might think possible. Barbara, who hadn't said much, joined in. I think Rada's last point of continually talking about sustainable development is critical. We all want development, but we don't want development that is going to ultimately destroy our world. It makes sense, and it feels right. The world will accept controls if they are made to believe they are essential to sustainable development. Everyone nodded in agreement. Sustainable development was definitely a horse that they could ride. Michael pulled his chair closer to the others in the room. As we leave the summit, I think it's important that we all understand where we're headed. We can say things in this room that we cannot say in most circles. We know that our goal is one world government. Environmentalism is simply a means to an end. We still don't know for certain if some of our environmental claims are valid. Questions remain about global warming. We're not even sure about carbon dioxide emissions and the ozone layer. But none of this matters. The overriding issue is to save the world from the scourge of war by banishing nationalism and religious strife from the face of the earth. Only world law and thus world government can accomplish this. So here's the plan. We must continually advocate world law through an ever-increasing number of international treaties. We must launch a relentless campaign for the establishment of an international court system. We cannot have an enforceable world law without a world court. We also will need to promote the creation of a world tax. Without independent funding, the United Nations will always be at the mercy of the nations that hold the purse strings. It will be important to exploit every world development to argue in favor of these international structures. We must increasingly use international tribunals to deal with genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. This is particularly important when it comes to heads of state. The message needs to be sent loud and clear that no one is above international law. Once this principle is firmly established in our world, national leaders will be much more reluctant to do anything that might be a violation of international law. One or two high-profile trials of former heads of state, as the opportunity presents itself, will instill the proper respect for world law. Morris spoke up. One last thing. In everything that is said in promoting the future one world government, it is important that we always refer to it as global governance, not world government. The Secretary General asked curiously, "Don't you think the average person will figure out that global governance and world government is the exact same thing?" Michael shook his head. "No, they won't. You can't believe how simplistic people can be. They are sheep that want to be led, and we will lead them." With that, the meeting was adjourned. Chapter 14. Michael and Radha boarded a plane for Hawaii the next morning. They wanted a few days of relaxation after their rigorous involvement in the Save the Earth Summit. It was always good to step back from the forest in order to be able to take another look at the trees. They also wanted to catch their breath before laying plans for the future. After settling into their private chalet, they headed out to a secluded beach where they could relax, free of intrusions. Michael lay back in his lounge chair. It felt so good to empty his mind and do nothing. He knew the opportunity would be short-lived, but for now, it was the tonic he needed. He looked at Radha and smiled. She was as beautiful as ever. Radha reached over, taking his hand. They both knew what the other was thinking. Yes, she agreed. It would be nice to live like this all the time without the suffocating responsibilities of global leadership. But neither of us could stand it. This will be good for a day or two, but then we will be chomping at the bit to get back to saving the world. Radha squeezed Michael's hand lightly and then let go, laying her head back to soak in the sun. Around 4 p.m., Michael and Radha returned to the beach house to shower and dress for dinner. It was impossible for Michael to go anywhere in the world and not be recognized. Consequently, his Secret Service entourage had arranged a private room in a very exquisite restaurant situated right along the ocean. They escorted the Arachofs through a back door into the prepared room. It was serene and lovely. Radha ordered the seafood platter while Michael ordered lobster and steak. As they waited for their food to arrive, Michael's eyes swept over Radha appreciatively. For the first time, he noticed the ornament dangling at the hollow of her neck. He didn't remember seeing it before. Reaching over, he took the jewelry in his hand, examining it. It was a circle on a chain. Inside the chain was a pentagram. "Where did you get this?" Michael inquired. "Oh, Barbara gave that to me." "Do you like it?" "Well, it's nice. I'll admit that I was a little startled to see the pentagram," Michael said apprehensively. "You know, Michael," Radha began, "I experienced a strange attraction to the pentagram the day we toured the Wiccan worship site on the Morris Ranch. When Barbara explained to me the meaning of the pentagram, I identified with it immediately." Holding the jewelry in her hand, she continued, "Do you remember what these 5 points of the pentagram stand for?" "Remind me." With barely concealed excitement, Radha held the pentagram so Michael could see it. The pentagram involves the earth and its environment. Each point stands for an element of nature. I think that's why it attracted me so much. This first point stands for fire, the second for air, the third for water, the fourth for earth, and the top point represents spirit. Hesitating, Radha then went on. "You know, Michael, I've been thinking that this could almost be the symbol of the environmental movement." "Radha, don't ever say that to anyone else. I can hear the conservative talk show hosts now. Ladies and gentlemen, the symbol for witchcraft has now become the official symbol of the environmental wackos." I know, Radha laughed. "For public relations reasons, it would never fly. But to those of us who know there is no God or devil, we realize how appropriate it would be." Taking the pentagram in his hand and looking at it one more time, Michael said with a smile, "I must admit, I do like it." After dinner back at the beach house, Radha turned on the TV. CNN, NBC, Fox, and all the major networks were discussing the Save the Earth Summit, Agenda 21, sustainable development, carbon dioxide emissions, and global warming. Some of the commentators were pro-environmentalism, some were against. Nevertheless, they were talking about it. Michael looked at Rada, grinning. You know what they say, kiss me or slap me, just don't ignore me. When they awoke the next morning, the sun was glimmering across the Pacific Ocean. They had planned another day at the beach, however, Rada knew her husband too well. She immediately sensed in him that driving restlessness to get back to his mission. You're not wanting to go to the beach today, are you? She asked with a knowing smile. Not really, Michael returned a little apologetically. It's okay, Rada assured. I'm tired of doing nothing anyway. Maybe we can relax here in the room and brainstorm together, Michael suggested. We don't have to feel pressured, but still we can work if we want to. Sometimes that's when we get our best work done. Sounds good to me, Rada agreed. Let's do it. After the breakfast brought by the Secret Service, Michael sat in the lounge chair beside the window. Already, Rada could see the wheels turning in his mind. She pulled out the notebook that she always carried with her for occasions like this. Michael began talking. We first need to redefine our goals, Rada wrote as Michael talked. Of course, our all-encompassing long-range goal is the establishment of one world government, Michael said matter-of-factly. Interim goals that will lead us to our ultimate destination include strengthening the UN, establishing a world court, creation of a global tax, unifying the world's religions. Am I forgetting anything? Michael asked. Rada spoke up. There's one more thing that's important, but it's pretty much taking care of itself. That's the global economy. Since the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization are now so universal in their scope, a one-world economy is virtually assured. That's certainly an important element that must be continually monitored, Michael responded, and without economic union, everything else begins to break down. Okay, I think that summarizes our critical goals, Rada said with considerable satisfaction. Now for the fun. How do we get from here to there? Rada, our plan will have to be altered many times between now and the ultimate realization of our goal, Michael responded. But let's create a preliminary plan for the accomplishment of each of our short-term goals. This will keep us on track as we move toward our target. The first goal is to strengthen the UN, Rada prompted. And how can we do that? Michael responded thoughtfully. We must devise ways to transfer sovereignty from the national level of government to the world level. We should encourage multilateral action and discourage nations from acting alone. The Gulf War of 1991 is a great example of that. President Bush assembled a coalition of nations to act in solidarity against Saddam Hussein. Out of that grew the understanding that international conflict should be solved by action from the world community. This kind of thinking must be continually fostered. The world's thinking needs to evolve until any unilateral military action taken without prior UN approval is considered a war crime. Eventually, the world community will make all decisions concerning war and peace. We must promote the teaching of Agenda 21 in all high schools and colleges around the world. We must also encourage the governments of the world through persistent environmental conferences to adopt the principles of Agenda 21. We need to form a global environmental organization that can continually author new treaties to meet specific environmental needs. This environmental organization would then lobby the governments to ratify the treaties, bringing them into the status of law. These treaties would affect every aspect of governmental, business, and private life. An annual forum on world affairs could be held to keep the dream of one world government before the minds of the world's key influencers. This will be a very high-level meeting, and attendance will be by invitation only. The second goal must be the establishment of a world court, Rada reminded. Michael agreed. We are already way down the road to accomplishing that one. Of course, a world court system has been envisioned since 1948. The international tribunals of Rwanda, Yugoslavia, and others are preparing the world to accept a permanent standing world court. Our friends at the World Federalist Organization understand how central this is to the achievement of world government. I know they will be happy to lead the charge toward an international court system. And the global tax? Rada questioned. Michael grimaced. You know how difficult that one is going to be. Nations never want to surrender financial control. The old adage, he who has the gold makes the rules, is still true. At first, we will have to concentrate on some kind of tax on international activity, perhaps international air travel, international financial transactions, or something similar. But Rada, We must find a way to get this done. To claim independence of action for our world government structures without financial independence is an illusion. One thing we can do is present the idea to the world over and over until people finally start getting used to it. Next, how do we go about unifying the world religiously? Radha asked. This had become her area of interest over the years. As you know from touring the Samuels Ranch, this work is quite far advanced, Michael reminded her. There is a meeting of the Parliament of the World's Religions that will be held next year in Chicago. Buddhists, Sikhs, Baha'is, Zoroastrians, Muslims, Christians, and even Wiccans will be attending with the stated purpose of seeking common ground. I have friends at the UN who dream of establishing a United Religions organization after the pattern of the United Nations. We will encourage it. That will be a huge step toward unity. Which brings us to our final area of discussion, global economy. As you said, everything is pretty much on track with the World Trade Organization. There is one more long-range need as far as the economy goes, Michael explained. You don't fully control people until you control them economically. We will eventually need economic control over each individual in order to achieve true world government. However, we're not nearly ready for that stage yet. By afternoon, Michael and Radha had hammered out their game plan. The outline looks something like this. Blueprint for world government. Long-term goal. A world government including every nation and individual on the planet. Short-term goals. Strengthen the UN. Establish a world court. Create a global tax. Unify the world's religions. Solidify the global economy. The plan. Strengthen the UN. Transfer sovereignty from nations to the UN, promote international law by every possible means, promote multilateralism, condemn unilateralism, promote Agenda 21, establish a global environmental organization, gain control over nations through environmental treaties, annual forum on world affairs, establish a world court, encourage efforts of the World Federalist Organization, creation of a global tax, continual promotion, unify the world's religions, Parliament of the World's Religions, birth of the United Religions Organization, solidify the global economy, strengthen the World Trade Organization, devise a means of individual economic control.